As you can see, I'm here talking about the work of the Blue Shield. Thank you to the organisers for organising this, and thank you for all the participants for coming to listen. And as you see, it's our 25th anniversary year, so quite a lot to report on. The Blue Shield is an international NGO established under Dutch law, dedicated to the protection of cultural heritage and cultural property. And we tend to use the word cultural property because of the 1954 Hague Convention in conflicts and disasters. And we were established in 1996 in anticipation of the second protocol to that Hague Convention. We were established by the four founding organizations, as we call them. You've heard a lot about one of them, ICOMOS, already, but also ICOM for museums, IFLA for libraries, and ICA for archives. And those, together with, at the moment, 28, but 10 more on the way, national committees, together elect an international board, supported at the moment by a secretariat funded through the logo at the bottom right of your screen, my UNESCO chair at Newcastle University. And that together, the international board and the secretariat called or referred to as Blue Shield International. And the Blue Shield is named after the icon down here, which is the identification in the 1954 convention for property and individuals to be protected, involved in the protection of cultural property during an armed conflict. And down here, our logo is the 54 emblem, but within the blue circle. As I've already said, our primary context is that 1954 Hague Convention and its two protocols, but we are underpinned by much wider international law, the Geneva Conventions, the additional protocols, the Rome Statute, etc., the UN's agenda, especially through the Security Council and resolutions such as 2347, and UNESCO's 6 cultural conventions and other directives and strategic agendas. So that broader context. We're also conscious, obviously, for the SDGs, and Aparna has already mentioned it, but the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. We see cultural property protection as a collective responsibility. So it's not just the heritage sector, but what we refer to as the uniform sector, a point I'll come back to in a moment, and of course the humanitarian sectors. And just to pick up where Zeynep spoke a moment ago, we are talking closely with the Sphere organization in Geneva, trying to put in that CPP element into the humanitarian clusters. We are frequently referred to as the cultural equivalent of the Red Cross. And my response to that is always probably not in my lifetime. But what we are doing is laying the foundations for that cultural equivalence to the ICRC to be a reality in the next perhaps 20 to 50 years. Maybe it will be in my lifetime, let's hope. Our mission is that we are committed to the protection of the world's cultural property, and we're concerned with the protection of cultural and natural heritage, tangible and intangible, in the event of armed conflict, natural or human-made disaster. And the images you'll see are just reflecting some of the activities. So on the previous image, we had one of our BSI colleagues working on an exercise with NATO. Here you see the Argentinian National Committee taking some time out from making a TV program about their work in Argentina. We are frequently asked if the protection of old things is more important than the protection of people. And of course, our standard and always reaction to that is, of course not. People first, always. But cultural property is about people. Intangible cultural property or cultural heritage is held within people. It gives them their identity and their sense of place. And as the German playwright Heinrich Heine wrote all the way back in 1821, where they burn books, they will in the end burn people too. And sadly, we've had the reflection of that in the fighting in former Yugoslavia, and more recently fighting in the Middle East over the last few years. The two, protection of people and protection of their cultural property and cultural heritage, are completely intertwined and completely indivisible, is our argument. So today we work as that international organization with national committees, with joint action, working with partners, which I'll talk about more, but we are an independent and neutral, we hope increasingly professional, although primarily voluntary organization with, of course, a respect for cultural identity. And luckily, because we have no money, we are not for profit. And again, you'll see one of my colleagues there, Emma Cunliffe, speaking later in this conference, working on a desktop exercise with colleagues from NATO as part of a much bigger NATO exercise back in 2018. So I say we need to protect cultural property. We need to work with the uniform sector, and that's not just the armed forces, but police, customs, and again, as we've heard a lot, emergency services such as fire brigades. We need to work with the humanitarian sector, and we are doing that at the moment. And of course, we have to work with the heritage sector, where our founding four organizations come from. Within that, though, that all has to take place within a broader context of political, legal, media issues, and the societal environment where communities actually live and engage. And this is the area that we all have to work with. And to help with that, we are in the process of developing formal agreements with partners, with the International Committee for the Red Cross and NATO last year, with the UN peacekeeping deployment in Lebanon last year, although we've been working with UNIFIL since 2013. And we are in the process, if I ever get to it on my desk, of developing the formal relationship with UNESCO. And there you can see training that we did at the end of 2019 with the Irish Defence Forces, who only deploy as UN peacekeepers. So to understand that milieu, there you have the broader environment of politics, law, media, writ large, communities. But then we have this triangle, as we describe it, in the middle, where the three points of the triangle are those three different sectors. And the space inside is where the Blue Shield operates to bring those three sectors together, to cooperate and to understand the importance of CPP, cultural property protection, from all of their perspectives. So it's a heritage priority, but it's also increasingly an international security issue and many others. But we cannot just go into that triangle saying we must protect all of this because it's heritage. We must ask why those other sectors will see why protection of cultural property is important to their work. So firstly, it's seen as a security issue by the UN Security Council. It's about people. That relationship is indivisible, and therefore it relates very closely to the humanitarian sector. It's a legal responsibility under international humanitarian law, human rights law, customary law, and not infrequently, criminal law. There are political uses of cultural property that we would be naive to disregard, but we have to understand and encapsulate in our work. It can have implications for the continuation and the extension of conflict by the sale of antiquities and other heritage elements for the purchase of guns, ammunition, etc., to prolong a conflict. It's critical, as we've heard already, about conflict stabilization, post-conflict stabilization, and the economic value through especially tourism. And it can be used both by the armed forces, by the rest of the uniform sector, by the humanitarians as a force multiplier or not. But all of that needs to be built in and become part of the mission of all of those parts, those points of that triangle. And it can't be done just as something happens as we go into conflict or following a disaster. That relationship has to be developed during peacetime. Most people say that cultural property is damaged during armed conflict as collateral damage. And yes, that's part of the problem, but we've identified, and I don't have time to go through them all, but 8 threats to cultural property. And if we addressed each of those threats in peacetime, in cooperation with those in uniform, we could significantly lower the overall risk to cultural property during conflict. And there I am talking to officers from 9 different countries on a training course in the UK back in 2019, making those points about partnership before any conflict starts. We ask all of our national committees, and BSI does this as well, to identify and plan under 6 areas of activity. They all overlap, and you can see them there. Again, I'm not going to go through them all, but those areas of activity, and there's more detail on our website, focus the mind, and we ask national committees to prioritize those in whichever order is most important for their national situation. So you may have very different prioritization of that, but we ask people to plan and report in the same way to those 6 areas of activity. So we are getting a coherent international framework together. Some of our current activity, for example, in Beirut, I was speaking on the phone to colleagues from Blue Shield Lebanon, luckily where we have a very active national committee. I say luckily, we've been working with colleagues in Beirut since 2003, and we've been working with the DGA, the Lebanese Armed Forces, and UNIFIL since 2013. And it was because of that work that we've been doing together over that nearly decade that we were able to set in motion a report very quickly. The explosion on a Tuesday, the report came out for the non-DGA related museums, libraries, archives on the Sunday. We were able to get international funding by, or the commitment by the Wednesday. And we were then able to secure, by boarding up windows, closing doors, etc., and stabilize some buildings over the next 3 months. And that's really a difference in the relationship that we have with our founding organizations. So there we were immediately doing that work, helping those people who didn't have the infrastructure or the funding to board up the windows of their museum, for example. But then we step back and let ICOMOS and ICOM and the others take over the long-term management of those particular issues. We're working with NATO on a template for targeting information. One of the things that the armed forces constantly say to us is they're very willing to try to protect cultural property, but they can't do it if we don't tell them where that is. We're working with NATO to develop more and more detailed exercise input where NATO troops will be exercising about how to win a conflict or stabilize in a peacekeeping operation, but we put in problems that they might not have thought about in terms of cultural property and how do they deal with that. We're building the capacity of national committees. We're developing generic training materials for peacekeeping missions. We've been working with UNIFIL in Lebanon to help develop that since, as I say, 2013. We've trained the Irish and the Fijians who only deploy as UN peacekeepers, and we are building that expertise. It overlaps, obviously, with the expertise for armed conflict, but some of the pressures and some of the issues are subtly and significantly different. We're working, as I say, developing relations with the humanitarian sector, with the ICRC, and with the organization Sphere, which produces every 6 or 7 years the Sphere Handbook. And it's into that we hope we will get a chapter soon. It may not be in the next one, but we hope at least one after that, specifically relating to CPP. And we are doing all of this at the moment. The only funding coming into Blue Shield is through Newcastle University, as I say, through my UNESCO chair. That's guaranteed for 3 years. So in the next 3 years, one of my biggest jobs is to try to find medium or long-term funding for a small Blue Shield office. Our future, or the future, we hope all countries will ratify and properly implement the 54 Convention and its protocols. We want all state parties to that convention to have a national committee of the Blue Shield. We want to integrate and facilitate the integration of that broad triangular approach across the uniformed humanitarian and heritage sectors. And yes, absolutely, we want to be the cultural equivalent of the Red Cross. And when I was in Geneva with the now last Director General, Yves Dacour there, you see second from right, from when we were signing the MOU with the ICRC in February of last year, we were eyeing up his car park where we could probably build a new building for the Blue Shield at some point in the future. That's our website. That's my email address. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. And we hope that we will see a new Blue Shield National Committee in all of your countries in the very near future. Thank you very much for listening.